Welcome, everybody, to this week's episode of Pluralia Dialogos, where I am very happy to be joined by, at the very least, one special guest. We might get a surprise with Robbie Barwick. However, Cynthia Chung is in the green room right now waiting to join me. And Robbie, who lives in Australia, is there's some issues with the time zone. So hopefully we get that sorted out and he shows up too. But until then, let me welcome to the stage Cynthia Chung. Cynthia, president of the Rising Tide Foundation, how are you doing today?
I'm doing okay.
All right. Well, look, you and I were talking a little bit before the show about different pathways to approach this very important topic that's on everybody's mind. People I speak to, people that you speak to, we're living in a very dangerous moment in human history, and our eyeballs are always glued to the feeds, the streams, the social media updates, about what's going on right now, especially in regards to the war in Iran. And I know you have a nice approach where you found a way to balance looking both at the forest and at the trees at the same time. So I really appreciate you taking the time today, and we'll hopefully have some time to speak to the audience if we notice some questions coming up from the audience at a certain moment. But until then, I know you're in the middle of publishing a series of essays dealing with what is the real agenda behind Venezuela, Iran, Greenland. It's still in the process of being created. You've published two parts of this series, and you haven't quite addressed in a big way fully the Iran issue. You've been dealing with the global geopolitical stage and what's behind the different moving parts, both in terms of the Americas, Fortress America. Sorry about that. I just lost my connection. Fortress America, what have you. Also the question of Greenland and the straits, the battle over shipping lanes, the battle over strategic mineral supply chains, things like this, that are all sort of vectoring around. They're not detached from what's going on in Iran right now. But Iran is something which is confusing a lot of people. Some people say it's going according to plan. Other people say that it's a shit show, forgive the French. Where do you see that at the moment? And then we'll maybe take a step back and see what do you think is the broader real agenda behind the war in Iran?
Well, I guess maybe an interesting way to open it up is I think Senator, his name is Chris Murphy, he had made a tweet recently after a 2-hour briefing where he basically revealed that when he was asked, like, what are the goals for the American side in this Iran war, they said to hit drones, hit factories, hit, these sort of targets that can easily be built back. So no mention, oddly, of regime change in a recent briefing. And he said, well, what do you do when Iran, you stop firing on them and they just rebuild these things? And their answer was reportedly, well, then we'll just do it again. So it's a very odd strategy from the United States, especially in the context that the economy is really not doing well. The 2025 tariffs were, in case people are not aware, it was an abysmal performance. It was meant to contain China's exports, and China actually had a record trade surplus here. They actually exported more in 2025 despite the U.S. tariffs than they have in all previous years, and U.S. actually decreased in their exports. So the exact opposite of what they wanted. The U.S. dollar is not doing well. Its world reserve currency status is not looking good right now for them to be able to continue that. The U.S. Treasury bonds, basically the U.S. is in a huge amount of debt, and they are scrambling to sell bonds to not only get them out of the hole that they've dug themselves in with their hyper financialized debtor economy, but now they've thrown over 5 billion. I think it's now like at 10 billion or more in terms of just missiles thrown at Iran. And missiles cost about $2 to $4 million, and a drone costs about 20,000. So they've been spending about 2 to 4 million in a missile strike for a drone that costs 20,000. It's like not a very good strategy, to say the least. On top of things, China has put a ban on critical minerals to U.S. defense companies. There was another round of bans this past December, January. So at this point, the U.S. is pretty much cut off from critical minerals, which are essential for making military weaponry, for building any kind of equipment or jets or ships that you want in military warfare. You need access to these critical minerals that China pretty much controls the supply chain, the refining and the processing that needs to occur for these critical minerals to be then used in these kinds of products. So it's very confusing as to what the United States was thinking in launching this recent war with Iran. It looks like they thought that they could come to an agreement like they did this past summer after the 12 days war, and that the idea, I think, is just to, as that senator said, to cause Iran to spend their missile stock to hit maybe certain things to kind of push Iran backwards constantly. And with all of the sanctions hitting the country, their currency is not doing well. I think that they were ultimately hoping for an internal revolt, as they did with Russia too, with the Ukraine situation, which also backfired, by the way. And Iran this time is looking like they're going to have the Strait of Hormuz closed for a long time now, way longer than I think anyone was expecting. And they're going to put the pressure on, especially the Western economies are going to be hit really hard in this situation, which we can talk a little bit more about why that is.
Yeah, no, that's I think a pretty sobering beginning to this conversation. There's a certain synchronization of narrative across the media space right now that a lot of people have noticed, and this pertains to a certain piece of propaganda that goes like this. It's a little mantra that we're seeing everywhere. I'm going to play this 1-minute video, and based on what you said as well, get you to just speak to that for a moment. Here it is.
The Treasury Department temporarily lifting sanctions on Russian oil this week amid reports that
Got that one. Wrong video. This one.
This is a short-term disruption for the long-term gain.
Short-term pain for the long-term gain.
Short-term pain be for long-term gain.
We're going to have some short-term pain with long-term gain.
Short-term pay for a long-term gain.
Some short-term pain, yes, but we've got some long-term gain. Short-term spike for a long-term gain.
Some short-term pain for American consumers.
We may have to deal with that in the short term.
Short-term and temporary.
Temporary short-term pain.
It's going to suck in the short term.
Some short-term pain.
Short-term pain. We have to focus on the short-term.
Short-term.
Short-term. Short-term.
Short-term and long-term.
Short-term blip.
Hopefully this is a short-term pain.
Short-term is highly outweighed of the long-term benefits.
Some short-term pain for the long-term gain.
Short-term sacrifice for a long-term gain.
Wow.
All right, so we can all agree, it seems that there's a consensus that pain and sacrifice everybody agrees to. This question of long-term gain, do you see, is there any way where you're looking at this where that makes sense? Or is this just pain to the end? And also, number two, do you think that, because I think a lot of these narrative shapers, they're promoting the idea that there is still an easy way, like you said, to pull out of Iran, like we did after the 12-day war. You know, Trump could just declare victory like he did back then, or just simply say, okay, mission accomplished, we hit all of our targets, Iran's got nothing left. And there does seem to be a certain amount of evidence that is being attempted or being floated as an idea by Trump to simply try to extricate the U.S. by saying, okay, we've hit everything that there is to hit. But at the same time, there's contrary messaging as well that are indicating that there is no intention of leaving the Middle East, leaving Iran. So what is your take on that? Is this really potentially a smart move with a long-term gain, or is this all negative?
I think this is absolutely disastrous for the United States, and also Europe is going to be affected really badly by this decision. And it started with the 2025 tariffs. The economies were not doing great to begin with, and the tariffs have really backfired. They were never a good idea. They functioned as a revenue tariff, not an actual protective tariff, for one. And it was for the government. I think that Scott Bessent understood that from the get-go. It was it's the U.S. government who has taken in any kind of revenue at the expense of the manufacturing base, the U.S. manufacturing base, the U.S. consumer base, the U.S. business base, and they're using that revenue largely for military expeditions, which is very short-sighted. Again, with the US dollar not doing so well, this is very precarious. They need to raise even more funds now, scrambling for this military adventure that they have started, which has cost a lot of money for not a lot of gain in any kind of long-term situation with Iran. Iran, the Ayatollah was killed, and the U.S. has shown a lot of bad faith, even during the 2025 tariffs, this constant back and forth negotiation with China. When they met with China and Switzerland, they, from what I understand, made a deal with China because they really needed the critical minerals, and apparently didn't think China was going to withhold these critical minerals. And when they realized this, they scrambled to make a deal with China and Switzerland, and then immediately turned around, because part of this was to allow for the trade in the semiconductor chips, especially in the Middle East. And apparently the US, very shortly after, within a month or so, started to again threaten Middle Eastern countries if they bought Chinese semiconductor chips. So they broke the deal. And this has just been an ongoing thing. At this point, why would anyone take the word of the United States? It's this Senator Chris Murphy has acknowledged that their plan is to just continuously strike Iran. So I think at this point, Iran clearly has the upper hand in this. They can hold the Strait of Hormuz. They've shown that they can do this. This is going to put a lot of pressure on the economies of the United States and Europe. And they have said that the Gulf countries are able to pass through the Strait of Hormuz if they expel their American diplomats. They have struck a lot of the U.S. military bases, very expensive radar systems and equipment. I think that Iran is very serious that they want to expel the U.S. presence from the Middle East, and China has also been helping. Chinese ships have been able to travel through the Strait of Hormuz. There's the other issue too, that the oil. So Saudi Arabia's biggest oil production that had to be closed off. UAE has also had to close off their biggest one. Qatar's LNG is also shut off, and there have been the refining stations for these oil processing have also, I think, been hit or have been shut off. So at this point, the refining, because you can have all of the crude oil or oil supplies you have, but if you don't have the capability to refine it, it's not going to be very useful for things like fuel, including jet fuel, for instance, gasoline and diesel. And the U.S. right now is already at maximum capacity. And when they seized the Venezuelan oil, there is not an ability to refine this oil. China was buying 90% of this oil. So all of this oil that is unrefined is sitting there. India might buy some of it, but I think the United States was hoping that China was going to buy this, and they're not going to. So there is a situation now where there is a shortage of basically refinery stations, and China is at 70% capacity. So they actually, once again, the U.S. has shaped the situation in a way that has actually put China in a greater advantage, Russia as well. Trump is clearly desperate enough with the situation that he unsanctioned temporarily Russian oil, although it's not clear if Putin is actually going to increase production or not. or even, sell it to Europe and the United States, since this is clearly an advantage. China has already canceled contracts that they had for their oil exports because they want to keep it within the country, because obviously there's going to be a serious energy crisis that's going to hit, because Iran is going to hold the Strait of Hormuz, it seems, for a while.
Yeah, no, China even announced that they're going to stop exporting to Australia. That was actually a question I was hoping to ask to Robbie. But is this also behind the question of, or the matter of, Trump bizarrely asking Xi Jinping to buy U.S. oil and Venezuelan oil? It's a strange thing to do, considering that the U.S. has made it known, especially since the new strategic security document or security strategy document that announced the basic Fortress America idea of recalibrating U.S. self-interest, U.S. expansion policies away from a Middle East adventurism, away from an orientation towards, seeing Russia as our strategic dominant threat, and towards, focusing on the Americas, on the Western Hemisphere. Within all of that, China has been demonized. They've been vilified. They've been treated as a top threat. Undoubtedly, they recognize the current developments in the Middle East as partially, I would say, an attack on the broader multipolar alliance and the Belt and Road Initiative that they've been building up over years and years and years. Russia, I'm sure, sees the same threat to the international north-south transportation corridor, which has been built up for over 25 years of careful strategic planning that both require a strong, economically prosperous Iran to be a part of, keystone of both of these projects. But then you have Trump asking China to buy up U.S. and Venezuelan oil, and then also take the sort of a strange line to Russia, saying, okay, we're going to get rid of these sanctions. So is this part of maybe like some sort of, I've got a lot of people who are looking at this as if there's layers and games within games, and maybe this is all part of some grandiose plan to get some U.S., Russian, China slow alliance. That, do you see any of that, or do you think that this is just like incompetence and lack of foresight that's created this weird set of self-contradictions?
I think that the United States has been in a situation of privilege and advantage for so long that it really appears to be unfathomable that countries would say no to them. And, they've been able to apply pressure economically, and when needed militarily, or as they say, they can release the jackals on individuals as well, and take them out. And for the longest time, this has been very successful as a plan. But increasingly, China and Russia, along with the BRICS members and the BRICS observer states, are really building their economies, their capabilities. East Asia is quickly turning into a first world country extremely rapidly, way more rapidly than how the speed at which the West developed to get these kinds of first world standards. Although at this point, there's been a lot of decay, so they're not really first world anymore. But if you look at the sort of attacks that Trump is going after, they are very much key infrastructure that clearly this is not. It does not make any sense to think that they're both working together if one is building something and the other one is tearing it down pretty much. The Chancay port in Peru is a good example of this, which would be a very important trade route that China would have with Peru, as well as Brazil. There would be a plan for a rail that would go from Peru to Brazil. And Brazil right now is a very important breadbasket for China. Actually, China saw where the wind was blowing before Trump came into office, and they bought a lot of soybean and other type of food products from Brazil to really stock up on their food reserves, because they knew that they were going to be hit with a bunch of issues, economic warfare from Trump. So this is very serious. This is affecting people's livelihoods. If you look at what China and Russia are doing, this is not the kind of game that they're playing. This is the Western game, and they have seriously attacked countries' economies that have really caused a lot of people a lot of suffering. Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. And you have made a very strong case, and you just brushed upon it. And I know a lot of people are very confused by this. So I'd like you to just expand a little bit, since I know you're one of the few people who have done the work. There has been the hope that the protective tariff that we've seen revive under Trump, especially here in the second term, has been founded upon a revival of the better American traditions that did use a tariff policy in order to grow the economy, to prosper. And there's a lot of, I think, hope for that better age to be revived today. But you've made the point pretty concretely that that's not what's happening. And I was hoping you just differentiated the revenue tariff from the protective tariff, and made a point that the revenue tariff is more like what we're seeing right now, which is more weaponized. It's more something which, as an effect, hurts the American economy, the people, as well as foreign nations, versus a real protective tariff, which benefits foreign nations, as well as especially the local economy that's doing it. So could you maybe expand a little bit more on the difference between these two things, and why the current one is a revenue tariff, a more Teddy Roosevelt-like tariff?
Yeah, that's the interesting thing about Trump's frequent referral to William McKinley in 2025 when he was starting out the tariff strategy, and likening it to McKinley's protective tariffs, when actually McKinley, during his lifetime, was calling out the Democrats' proposal for sweeping tariffs on everything, and not really distinguishing how, like, whether the country can produce the good in adequate quantities or not, or whether they would need to import it. And by putting a blanket tariff on everything, it is a revenue tariff. It's essentially a tax. And it's a tax that the American people ended up paying too, because Scott Bessent kept arguing that it was going to be the other countries, it was going to be China that ate it. And we actually have the results now. The Federal Reserve has the statistics that it was like 90% paid by the U.S. manufacturing consumer business base. And despite this, Bessent is talking about raising the tariff to 15%. This is basically a way to just increase taxes on the people to generate revenue for military expenditure. That is what is going on right now. That's why he's talking about increasing the tariff, is because they did not think that the Iran war was going to last as long as it did and cost the money that they put into it. And there's a lot of signs in 2026 that the planning is not good. When Trump kidnapped Maduro, for instance, from Venezuela, one of the first things he did is he gave a tour with the U.S. big oil CEOs, and they told him, ExxonMobil told him, that it was uninvestable. The oil infrastructure situation in Venezuela, there are estimates that it would be $10 billion a year, up to $100 billion for 10 years. Is the estimated cost. But there's also the fact that there's no guarantee that you're going to be able to keep it, and the infrastructure and so forth. And this was apparently like something that was not discussed at all from the Trump administration with the big oil companies, let alone the fact that this is highly illegal, what they're doing. But it just shows that the planning seems to be really, ad hoc. There doesn't seem to be a lot of strategy going on here. There seems to be just a lot of, pushing your weight around, thinking that this is somehow going to work, and it's really backfiring. It's quite perplexing, actually.
Yeah, no, that's definitely an understatement. In your current research, you've been looking at the fight for maritime shipping dominance, and one of the things you touched upon is Greenland, and that's certainly we're hearing different narratives about the objectives behind expanding U.S. influence into Greenland. Some of which is positive. We've heard from the Russian side, and especially coming out of the Anchorage summit in Alaska, where Putin met with Trump, there was a certain discussion around the idea of Arctic cooperation together between the U.S. and the Russians. But those were words. I haven't seen a lot of action oriented towards that. Instead, what I've tended to see is discussion around expanding missile shields, space force based missile shields, things like that in the Arctic. We've had things like the Golden Dome discussed, but also the Space Force has a major base up in the north of Greenland, and that would be expanded feasibly, according to certain think tankers, as part of a plan to prepare for an oncoming war with Russia and China. So could you speak a little bit more about what is your view of the Arctic and the battle for the Arctic currently in a bit more detail?
Yeah, Trump has definitely, I think, focused more on Greenland working as a military base, and has also mentioned that NATO would have a presence there. There are two main trade routes. There are three in all, but two that pass on either side of Greenland in the Arctic. And as the ice is melting, this is going to be a very important trade route from especially Asia to Europe and North America. Because the tariffs have really backfired, again, clearly meant to contain China economically, the plan seems now to put a lot of work into controlling maritime corridors to control China's supply chain that way, by basically controlling whether they can navigate through certain corridors and whether they can also use certain strategic ports. The whole bluster at the beginning of 2025 over the Panama ports, for people who are not aware, BlackRock was looking to purchase 2 ports from the Hong Kong CK Hutchison, but there was also another 41 ports that they wanted to buy from CK Hutchison that were located all around the world, very strategic locations of ports. CK Hutchison clearly, was going to do this as a huge security threat to China. The only 10 ports they were not going to sell were actually within the territory of China. China has successfully blocked this deal, but BlackRock, for people who don't know, they're an asset manager for billionaires. They manage around $11.2 trillion right now, and they're buying up a whole bunch of infrastructure around the world for said purpose of controlling it within this certain select billionaire grouping that's also working with the G7. People can find out more about this on my Substack through Glass Darkly. Just look up BlackRock. BlackRock has also been in charge of rebuilding Ukraine, so it's pretty much working with government projects at this point. China successfully blocked BlackRock buying these 43 ports, but they have recently seized the Panama ports. So what I see is that the US and company are trying to control the maritime chokeholds to try to contain the Chinese trade and also just the BRICS trade more generally this way. And one of the reasons why they're so desperate to do this is, well, for one, their economy is not doing well. They have to export more. But the other thing is that their dollar is being threatened as the world reserve currency. And the more that China trades with other countries, especially in forms of energy, and they're trading in their own currency, this is ultimately going to move, the world away from the US dollar as the reserve currency, unlikely towards the yuan.
What would be the consequences? Like, how would that? A lot of people have been screaming about that. I've noticed about the idea of the Chinese wanting to overthrow the U.S. and take control of the world by making the yuan the reserve currency. What do you see as the benefits? Like, what would be the consequences if the U.S. dollar did tank and nations did decide to start going with a currency that had more foundation to it, like more basis in real value? Do you think that there's a different philosophy in China versus what we've been living under in the transatlantic? And also, do you think that it would be simply the yuan as the reserve currency, the way the dollar's been, that has been, you know, weaponized for decades and decades through sanctions and speculative attacks on smaller countries? Or do you think it would be something more like a BRICS basket of currencies that might be the foundation of a new type of economic structure? So the philosophy of it, do you think it would be better than what we have? What's your evidence for that? And what would it look like in terms of, would it be just one currency like the yuan, or would it be many? And what would that be based upon? I'm sorry for that big question, but you can speak to any part of that if you want.
Well, first of all, would it be good if the US was no longer the world reserve currency? Yes, because they have not been benefiting any economy, including their own, with how they've been using that position. They've been, you know, because they hold the world reserve currency status, they're allowed to sanction. And sanctioning countries like Iran and Venezuela, whatever you think about their government and their politics, you are causing a humanitarian crisis in that country. And that's not I don't think that should be something that should be tolerated either. You shouldn't be allowed to cause humanitarian crises in countries because you don't like the politics that they have. There's also been the sanctioning of energy prices, Russian energy prices, which have had a lot of destructive effects, even though the EU is really adamant that they want to pay 3 times or more for their energy. There is consequences to what they're doing as a policy. Shutting down their nuclear as well was a very foolish move, especially for countries like Germany, who are extremely adamant on this. They didn't have alternatives before they did these things. So obviously you're going to hurt the standard of living, and you're going to have a serious crisis on your hands eventually. The way that things have been conducted, I would argue that the global south, the majority of the world, would be happy to not have the US as the world reserve currency, because the US has conducted itself at this point, and Trump has talked about the BRICS nations as being anti-American in their policy. And what this translates to, as how I see it, and I don't see any evidence contrary to this, what this means is countries should have the US interests first. This is ridiculous, and that's not how a country should function. They should function to obviously raise the standard of their own people and raise mutually beneficial trade partnerships with other countries. But the US wants to dictate who can be friends with who, and that everybody needs to prioritize the United States first in all of their economic dealings. This was made very transparent with how Trump conducted himself with the 2025 tariffs. Japan is a very good example. Japan, a very close ally of the US, was told, and their economy is already on life support because they've acquiesced to so many of the United States requests of them over the decades, including sparking the Plaza Accord. Japan used to have a very strong industrial base. They used to have a very good banking system. And a lot of this has been ruined because of American intervention into this country. With the 2025 tariffs, Trump was asking them to buy American GMO rice when Japan makes their own non-GMO rice, to buy American cars when Japan builds their own cars that have a higher safety standard, to not trade with China on things that their economy really relies upon in terms of, relationship. So none of these things are beneficial. And oddly enough, they're not even beneficial to the US economy in the short term or the long term. And we can already see the short term results of the 2025 tariffs, which are disastrous for everybody. It didn't help anybody out. So I think that the United States at this point has shown that it is not fit to be a leader in the world. And in the case of China, I do agree in terms of the world reserve currency. I don't think that China wants it to just be all about the yuan. And I do think that there probably will be a BRICS currency basket. I don't know the details of this. They're probably, not talking too much about certain kinds of details anyway, because they want to, probably discuss it more and plan it out more. I know Sergei Glaziev was also having his own ideas as well in terms of this sort of thing. But obviously the yuan is going to make it possible to get to that position. So the yuan is obviously going to lead, and that is what is the primary currency that's being traded in now to remove the USD from this position. The Iranians, from what I've heard, is that they're going to now ask for anyone passing through the Strait of Hormuz to transact in the yuan. So I do think that China has shown itself to be a much more honest player. They have not broken deals. The Americans break the deals almost instantly. It's become so bad that most countries do not trust them at this point. And for all of their investment and the infrastructure projects that they've been working on with countries, this has all been shown, and they've been doing this since the 1970s. They've been shown to be very good. The interest rates are super low, and a lot of loans are even that China ends up just paying for it if they judge that the country is really not in a position to pay. For instance, in the case of Venezuela, they had oil that they could pay China back for these investments. And these countries are actually gaining infrastructure. When IMF and World Bank were doing loans, these loans came with all kinds of conditions, and you were not actually allowed to use the funds for certain kinds of infrastructure projects, including even electrical grids in Africa. So people have to really maybe look into a little bit more of how the IMF and the World Bank have been conducting themselves over the years, and really look into what China has been doing and what these countries have been reporting. Africa is a very good example of a lot of infrastructure being built. Things are happening. And that was always something that was not, there was always a cap being put on infrastructure being built, because if that happens, it gives a country more sovereignty. It's harder to control their politics, their behavior, their trade, and so forth.
Right now, the BRICS, it's still an evolving thing, right? There's many members. It's grown, it's doubled over the last few years from what it was just in 2023. It's gone from 5 members to 10, but one of those members is currently being attacked, Iran. They were made a member in 2024. But then you also have certain cracks within the BRICS, as they say. You've got UAE, which is hosting a lot of U.S. military bases. There's a lot of trouble that's causing between relations, clearly between the Iranians and Dubai. And then also you have Modi doing some weird fishy things too, going to Israel, trying to pitch the idea that Israel and India have a special relationship together and should build new transport corridors that could make the BRI irrelevant, like the India, Middle East, Europe economic corridor idea. What do you think are the biggest challenges to the BRICS right now, and what do you think is motivating Modi or the leaders of the UAE at the moment to take these risks when their self-interest seems so clearly laid out in the path of Eurasian cooperation, war avoidance, things like that? So I don't know if you could speak to that a little bit.
Yeah, well, I think that what you're bringing up is a good example of why China is not a dictator. China is clearly the biggest player in BRICS, and yet, allows countries like the UAE and India to also be members. And, for people who are not aware, China and India historically have been really bad relations politically for a really long time. It's still not great, and Russia usually has to be a mediator. between them, because there's a lot of distrust, I think, especially from the Indian side, because China is in a position of greater influence in many ways. I think that China's philosophy in dealing with countries that have sometimes problematic ways that they're conducting themselves, of like double dealings, backroom dealings that are duplicitous, is that at the end of the day, if you're not an ideologue fanatic, you're gonna go for the better business deal. And that's what they're banking on, that most people are going to be ultimately,
rational, self-interested actors.
Yeah, so you can still be like not the greatest person. You might not even be motivated to help your people out, but if you're given an option that is going to help your people out and you're going to make money off of it on top of it, you're going to probably still choose that option because you're going to make the money. So China has a way of doing business that, again, it's mutually beneficial, win-win, and I mean for the people as well. China has raised the living standard of their people. They've now surpassed the United States in life expectancy. So they're now around 81 or 82, and the US dropped from 78 to 76. It might even be a bit lower now. This is one of the best ways to judge what a country is prioritizing. So China, despite it putting a lot of strategy into its kind of economic friction with the United States, they're still investing. The United States is mostly putting its budget into the military. Even the AI bubble, it's mostly to serve military objectives. The data centers are going to cause a lot of humanitarian problems because they require a lot of water and energy, and there are shortages of water and energy. And China has put a lot of money into building up things that are for the society, infrastructure for the society, for the welfare of the people, the medical system, the transportation system. The way that the cities now look in China, again, maybe look on Red Note on YouTube or whatever, you can see that these cities are now way nicer than anything I've seen in Canada or the United States and even Europe. Like everything is like decaying in these parts of the world. We're living off of past laurels and feeling like we're superior, when we have actually, most people have no idea how high the living standard is in China at this point, how beautiful the cities are, and that they are pretty much, they look like capitalist cities. They don't look like, the kind of boogeyman communist cities or something. So I don't know if that answered your question.
But Cynthia, what you said contradicts the fact that what we see here are Chinese bases strewn throughout the world. I mean, if China wasn't a military power, then why would they put their bases all over the? Oh, wait a minute. Oh, wait, those are U.S. military bases. My bad. Okay, sorry about that. Okay, forget that we just saw that. So we clearly have, a paradigm of lose-lose versus win-win. Clashing. Obviously, these are not compatible ideas, open systems that presume that human beings can discover the laws of the universe that are outside of the confines of what is already known, can apply the fruits of those discoveries, as China has done. Clearly, like you said, they've pulled 1 billion people out of poverty in a relatively short time, and they're exporting that system that has allowed them to do that, to go from a third world country 40 years ago to becoming really, in so many ways, the world's top tier scientific engineering superhouse, with a growing middle class and also prosperous private sector, with a heavy focus on innovation. Just look at the whole battle around AI, NVIDIA, and what have you. They're generating more patents on high-speed rail, versus this other thing where we've just got decay, normalized decay, that we've been told to adapt to, and think that that's going to be normal. So we've got like clearly two clashing ideas of what the future is, what humanity is, that are duking it out. And then we've got Europe. We've got the strange phenomenon of Europe, and it's a sad, weird thing. This land that this people, the civilization that once gave rise to the glorious golden Renaissance of Florence, that gave rise to so much goodness and great philosophy and arts and science and Mozart and all of these great things and beautiful architecture that are doing something really suicidal. And I'll sort of, I guess we can end our conversation a little bit about Europe right now. They've been choked. It seems like they've self-immolated themselves over a few generations now of deindustrialization, of just cutting themselves off of their beautiful, deep traditions. And then you have a policy to just kill them. I mean, that's what happens when you just shut down abundant, cheap oil from Russia through the making pipelines go away, and there doesn't seem to be much in terms of a healthy way of thinking. We know that Merz, the Chancellor of Germany, has made certain accolades with other European countries to China to say, hey, let's be friends. But at the same time as they do that, which seems like a healthy thing to do, they're also saying to Russia, hey, we're gonna phase out all Russian gas and oil that's otherwise keeping us alive. We're just gonna legalize having new contracts. So could you say a little bit more? What do you see about what is motivating Europe? Is Europe controlling their own destiny? Is something else controlling Europe? What's going on with Europe and their energy security and their idea of thinking about energy more generally? Like what's happening there?
Well, I think that the plan because I mean, the United States also deindustrialized itself as well. And, Detroit, which was a real powerhouse industry-wise, it's now like pretty much a ghetto city. And I think that the reason why Europe and the United States was doing this to themselves was because the plan was that we were going to have a greater degree of scarcity that was self-imposed in order to have certain policy changes, because when you have crisis situations, this is when you can do the most radical changes politically. And the Davos Economic Forum, this was something that was created alongside the Club of Rome, pretty much for the Club of Rome mandate, which was just this, the limits to growth mandate to self-atrophy and reduce the world population, because, just like H.G. Wells, these people seem to be obsessed, this grouping of planners seem to be obsessed with a smaller population size, probably because it's easier to manage. But of course, yeah, if you're cutting down energy, you're obviously going to be cutting down population size as well in such a policy. And to the rate that you're cutting down energy is also going to decide the rate that you're cutting down the population size. So they were working on this framework, and nobody saw China coming. Like in 2013 or so, when the BRICS was formed, everybody was laughing at them. And for the longest time, they thought that China was going to continue, just playing the game and acquiescing. And China has worked and developed at an incredible rate in all sectors. It really is astonishing what they've been able to accomplish. Again, everyone thought it was impossible, just like they thought that it would be impossible for China to replace the US consumer base in 1 year as a reaction to the 2025 tariffs that weaponized the US consumer base against China. So they didn't see it coming, and now they're in a situation where they're caught with their pants down, and they're trying slowly to kind of steer the ship now in a completely different direction, because China is just moving so fast that they basically got, I think, sidelined. And this is why the United States does not, like, if you look at their national security report that they published in November 2025, where they're basically saying that they're going to seize the resources in Latin America. Europe also is going to be part of this plan. Greenland, I mean, it's all under super thick ice, so good luck with that. That's like a 20-year plan for Greenland. But all of these projects, even if you can theoretically take the resources in these areas, you don't have the ability to refine and process them. So this is still like at least 10 years, but it's more than 10 years, and a huge budget with money that they do not have, because the US functions as a debtor economy. They have to raise money from foreign investors, but everybody's growing broke who wants to side with the whole G7, crazy agenda at this point. So it's very clear that they are super behind at this point. It's very desperate. China has cut off the critical minerals supply to the US military. Some people say they have 8 to 12 months, and they're just throwing it at Iran like they have like unlimited stock. I heard that the F-35 jets, they had like the new nose radars that were not finished because of the shortage in supplies, and they had to weigh down the jets with like actual gym weights. And these jets were still, sent off to Iran. So it's crazy. It's a little bit like Dr. Strangelove.
Yeah, it really is. It's sort of like a tragic comedy in a weird way, and the fact that a lot of what's happening might seem to make a certain amount of sense from an abstract, Dungeons and Dragons board game player trying to game the world. But as soon as you start looking at, well, what are the practical realities behind all of these endeavors? You even mentioned in your essay, in your series, the fact that the U.S. is now punishing anybody using China's cargo ships. Any cargo ship made by China are getting punished with something like $1 million or $1.5 million of punishment, punitive fines if they arrive at a U.S. port or a U.S.-controlled port, because the U.S. supposedly wants to develop their own autonomous cargo fleet that could challenge China. So this is like a dirty way of doing it, punishing anybody who's bought a ship from China. But then you make the point, China produces like 357 or 360 of these massive cargo ships per year. The U.S. produces what did you say, one or two? One. The amount of practical steps that go into building up of mass production of these types of ships is going to be 10 to 20 years. All of these things, like you've said, accessing there's a ton of strategic minerals in Greenland, tons, but they're under miles of ice. It's like, okay, good luck. But think about the next 50 years if you want to actually start making that practicable. Or Venezuela, okay, you got their oil now, great. But like you've pointed out in this conversation and in your essays, the U.S. is already at almost maxing out their capacity of refining this type of low quality, like what do they call it, sour fuel. What are you going to do with that? To develop the capacity to actually make that usable requires years and years and years of work that they don't seem to have thought about. Mm-hmm. So there is this strange clash of abstract blackboard idea of what we want reality to be, completely breaking down in the face of what reality is. That doesn't seem to match. It's jarring, eh?
Yeah, and like in the case of critical minerals, you have to have a specialization in refining and processing each one. Like it's a different process for each one. So it's extremely challenging. China is the one with the know-how to refine and process most of these, if not all of them. That's why they dominate the critical mineral supply chain. Because like oil, these things are not ready to use like just out of the ground. So even if you could get it out of Greenland, you're still years away just from the refining and processing. In terms of the taxes on Chinese container ships, which would mean that any company, like a German company, a Japanese company, or whatever that uses a Chinese container ship would theoretically be taxed at a US controlled port. I don't think that is in effect yet, but they have announced it. You know, like US news agencies are saying that this is a plan. And this is, again, to try to curb competition with China. However, as you know, you're talking about the statistic, they only make one a year. You're not going to develop the capability to make 360 ships a year overnight. So what you're saying is you're going to affect world trade so that you can catch up with China. And this is another reason why the United States should not be the leader of the world reserve currency at this point. They've shown that they don't care about the health of global trade, and they're willing to throw anybody under the bus, including their own people. They're hurting their own base. This energy crisis that we're only at the beginning of because of this Iran war is going to increase the prices for everything, including food, because your food needs to be transported as well. And there is a very serious risk of hyperinflation hitting the United States and Europe out of this disastrous decision, thinking that Iran was just going to comply once again. You know, Iran has gone through so many waves of assassinations and first strikes by Israel, and the United States also, you know, aiding these, that why would we think that this would go on forever? It's very strange that the US thinks that almost like these countries like China, Russia, Iran are going to actually be the ones to exercise more patience, more self-restraint than the United States, which again just shows that the United States should not be in a leader position if they do not know how to exercise self-restraint.
Well said. Now we're at the top of the hour. We've gone through a lot today, and do you have time for a few questions from the audience?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. So Carlos CJ asks, Cynthia, does Russia and China learn from Iran in terms of defense and reshaping the landscape in their region? How has Russia managed Ukraine with kid gloves and China with Taiwan?
I think that Russia is in a situation with Ukraine where I think that they're in the clear at this point. You know, the Ukraine war was thrown at Russia to, again, try to cause internal revolt. That's what they were hoping for in Iran as well. And it doesn't look like these are going to be successful. In the case of Iran, Russia is already in the clear for that. Europe talking about helping, you know, carry out this war forever. I know that there are a lot of radical Ukrainians who also want to teach their children to continue fighting in this war. The limitations are, thankfully, material wise, right? The funds are just not there. The capability to make the equipment is not there. And now increasingly the United States wants European aid in building up there, because they're asking a lot of these industries to move to the United States on top of it. So the policies are like all over the place. And if you're asking for a whole bunch of these industries to move to the United States, obviously you're giving Russia and China actually more ground to move in. It's easier. In the case of the Taiwanese situation, I think that China, I'll mention that SIMSEC, I forgot now the acronym for it, but it's an American war game scenario think tank that also assessed other American think tanks and some Canadian intelligence agency think tanks. And basically all of them concluded, except for CSIS, which is a Canadian intelligence agency, that America would not be successful in a war with China. There were, I think, 4 or 5 scenarios that said that America would be defeated, and about 4 scenarios as well that said that there would be a stalemate and it would come at a great cost. 2 think tanks said it would be victorious, but the U.S. Air Force said it would be a Pyrrhic victory, which meant too costly to have been worth it, so not really a victory. And it was only CSIS who said it was a victory, but it would be bloody. So the United States seems to know this. Their security report from this past November 2025 seems to also recognize that they cannot challenge China directly. So they're trying to they're trying to cut off the supply chains through maritime chokeholds, taking over ports, seizing, cargo ships, and this sort of strategy, an indirect strategy. So already the United States has no choice but to back off more. And the U.S. arms sales to Taiwan, that's one of the reasons why China actually went even harder on the critical minerals ban. So China right now is holding 3 cards, actually, well, 2 special cards that are kind of checkmates to the United States, where they can win without any kind of a violent situation. And that's their holdings of the U.S. Treasury bonds and also the critical minerals. So it's sort of a sleeper hold that they have on the U.S. military right now in terms of the critical minerals.
Mm-hmm. Mike Dokes asks, has the USA got any policies towards Jamaica? It seems like the island gets forgotten. Of course, the Caribbean, the broader, I think Cuba right now is being lit on fire. There's mass protests, blackouts, controlled scarcity that seems to be ushering in potentially that awaited color revolution. You've already spoken about Venezuela. It's true, Jamaica and the other Caribbean nations don't often come into my mind, except as money laundering centers. What do you think about either Jamaica or the broader question of the Americas as a whole around this Fortress America policy? Do you have any thoughts about Jamaica or anything more broadly?
Yeah, I think that what is especially happening with Cuba right now is again about a trade route that Cuba actually is in a location where a lot of trade is happening using the Caribbean location, and by controlling Cuba, you again can control major trade routes to block Chinese access, right? So they already seem to want to block Panama. They want Cuba for this. They want Greenland for this. They've tried something on Iran, which Trump was at the beginning calling for an outright regime change. So it seemed like they were attempting to control that maritime route as well. So I see it being that. Mexico, unfortunately, is in a situation where they're acquiescing a lot. And I know that, there was, I think, a recent meeting that Trump was having with Latin American leaders to clearly kiss the ring. But so far, the way that things have been working for countries that are in a weaker position, they make pledges, they say words, because they know that right now the U.S. is in a very precarious situation. They're not in a position of strength at all. And the actions that the Trump administration have been doing since 2025 are accelerating the decline. They're accelerating their own collapse. So I think for a lot of these countries who can see that, it makes a lot more sense to just, pledge words and see what happens.
Mm-hmm. Jim Quinn has a brief observation that you might like to speak to. He's hypothesizing a scenario here. He says, if the techno-feudalism that is being thrust on us fails, possibly for a variety of reasons, international trade will be greatly diminished and economies will be localized. Do you think that Jim is correct in thinking through that scenario, or do you think that a different kind of outcome? I mean, right now the idea that, if techno-feudalism that is being thrust on us fails, I think it would only fail because you have the activation of proper sovereign nation states that are wielding their full powers based upon natural law. As Cynthia's pointed out, China has been doing quite well and has been inspiring and trying to invoke that same better tradition in its allies to do the same thing, which would require some form of a top-down type of battle to wield the power that's available to us against this very old, centralized, supranational oligarchy, which itself desires a highly fragmented, localized fiefdom set of, thousands upon thousands of microstates, network states, micro fiefdoms under a supranational top-down regime that they control. So I think if that fails, if the techno-feudalism fails, then you won't have a system of global scarcity, diminished economies, localized economies. You wouldn't have that. You'd have something that looks a lot more probably like what Abraham Lincoln or FDR were trying to do, envisioning a world liberated from empire that was not fragmented. It was more based upon finding mutual projects that uplift people to a better way based upon the future, a vision for the future. So I don't know if that's something you want to speak to, or did I do an okay job?
I think you did an okay job. And also I shared an image with you of a map on Telegram. I don't know if you're able to share the image or not.
It'll take me 30 seconds.
But it's a map that shows the U.S. command centers around the world and the maritime chokehold. So from what I see, the way that the Trump administration has been, putting a lot of pressure on Venezuela, Cuba, and Iran at the beginning of 2026, it's because the 2025 tariffs did not work to economically contain China. They cannot have a direct war with China, so they are now trying to block the main trade routes from China. And Greenland obviously is another important corridor there. And you can see there U.S. Northcom, U.S. Southcom. These are all the command centers, U.S. CENTCOM, that they have throughout the world. Again, this is not a great thing if we want countries to be able to actually make decisions for themselves and prioritize, the welfare of their people. That's the whole point of us, having the system where we choose elected leaders of countries so they can decide, and help out with the kind of decisions a nation needs to boost their economy. And the whole zero-sum game theory, for one side to win, the other side has to lose. This is totally not true. People can check out maybe some of our work on Rising Tide. One of our films called The Curse of Game Theory goes over why game theory is not actually real science or an accurate mathematical model, but was just used to impose policies upon us and pretty much brainwash us that there are not positive alternatives to how we can conduct ourselves as a country and also as relationships with other countries.
Mm-hmm. On that note, Mike has also just pointed out, Elon Musk has repeatedly said he doesn't think traditional money will have value in 20 years. From now, energy will be the currency as it will be needed for robots and AI. That's I think, a useful observation. However, what that means is it doesn't mean the same thing to everybody. Elon Musk, I think, is thinking a little bit more in terms of the type of platform that his grandfather was fighting for back in the 1930s and 40s. Joshua Haldeman, who is the head of Canada's Technocracy Incorporated party, or was more than a party. It wanted to basically overthrow all of capitalism, the entire nation state system, the elected class. They wanted to get rid of it, to bring in a society of engineers to then map out and mathematize how much energy is needed to keep an average human being alive, and then turn credit, basically create a credit system based upon how much energy is required for each person, premised around the idea of closed system entropy. That was a big part of the overall system of Technocracy Incorporated, the belief that entropy, the second law of thermodynamics, is an immutable law, and that we can somehow just mathematize everything, turning it into people's permission to have access to credits to buy their fuel, to buy their food or whatever, or to withhold it if they do bad things. So I think Elon Musk is sort of thinking about it that way. But then again, we were talking a bit earlier, Cynthia, about the idea of a new type of, the current system is going to end. We will get a new system. The question is, what will that system be? And I think you've talked about the yuan, Sergei Glaziev, who you've also brought up, who has certain, I think, competent ideas of the standard of value pertaining to things related to energy, right? How we produce certain things. Do you think that there's a healthy way of looking at what I think Elon Musk's way of thinking about it is pretty sick, but I think that there might be a healthy way. Do you think there's a healthy way of looking at generating whatever we think of as being currency, the thing that allows us to buy and exchange and to do business and invest, that would be tied not to the speculative markets, but to something more foundational when it comes to energy and what makes energy viable or improve, that could be the basis of something healthier?
Yeah, I haven't looked closely at how, what would be a proper way to address the volatility of how currently the energy markets are used. I don't think that it would probably be a good idea to just trade in energy, though. I know that Xi Jinping has talked about what his idea for what the yuan will play as a role, but again, it won't just be the yuan. Is that he wants to especially target the Wall Street hyper-financialized way that the system is organized. So, the United States, when they had the 2008 crash, that should have been a wake-up call. And instead, they kept doing what they were doing. That is the definition of insanity, because they knew it was going to blow. And I think that they knew it was going to blow, and they were hoping that they were going to be able to dictate the terms for what would be the new online, currency and form of government, maybe even a world government. But again, China has really offset those plans of them dictating the terms. And now they're in a situation where they have done everything for their system to blow, and they're not in a position of control. So Xi Jinping has made it very clear that he wants to deal with this problem. And I think the City of London and Wall Street is a major problem. And I don't know the details. I haven't had time yet to look into how he's thinking of addressing these sorts of ideas. But I definitely will be looking into it and generating some thoughts and probably a paper on it. But I think that he has shown a lot of wisdom in how he's been conducting, China. And there was a TED talk by I forgot his name, but he was talking about how China is basically a meritocratic system. If we're going to have a name for the Chinese political system, a meritocracy is probably the most accurate. And they were talking about how you have to be in charge on several levels before you can just be in charge of the whole country, right? Like someone like Trump would never have been elected as a leader of China without any previous experience being a leader in smaller regions, and then higher and higher, greater responsibility with greater population size. And what China has done in terms of problem solving for all types of scenarios, it's been very impressive. So I think that's very good news that he wants to address the Wall Street and City of London parasite.
Yeah. No, that struck me too. The conciseness in Xi Jinping's speech, where he was making the point that oligarchical Wall Street, City of London problem is what can never be permitted to rise again, and whatever that future system is, that can't be permitted, which is a topic, a line of discussion that's not permitted into polite society. If you're going to be in political power positions, you're not allowed to speak that way in the West. So there, and you can see it. They actually have been taken down in China. There's something like 5.3 million party members who have faced serious consequences for the crimes that they committed, including the former governor of the Bank of China. Several justice ministers, 2 heads of Chinese Interpol and the security state apparatus, which is basically like the Chinese CIA, heads of that have been given life imprisonment sentences for the crimes that they did, acting as agents of shadow government powers penetrating into China. So there's a proof in the pudding as far as action is concerned, which everyone would like to see something analogous to that in the West, where we've had this thing parasitically preying upon civilization for far too long. And I think what you've said is important too, because it gives people when you read some of the policy papers of the Technocracy Incorporated Party back in the 30s that Elon Musk's grandfather was pushing, they also use words like meritocracy, that we should only allow the qualified to rule, right? Not the business class, not the elected class. They're not qualified. It's the scientists, it's the experts. But it's like, yeah, but first of all, it's hyper elitist, and you think that these experts are somehow a higher species than the non-experts. There's this weird assumption of the superior master races controlling the inferior races that have lesser capabilities and must be ruled over. So you're already assuming that there's a total anathema to any type of compatibility with the democratic process in that philosophy. And on top of that, you think that humanity is ultimately needing to have their perception. They need to have their perceptions, their constraints controlled rigidly by this higher elite, and you're not dealing with any of the realities of these historic power institutions that have been run by this parasite. You're just ignoring all of that, presuming that this abstract mathematical world of utopia can just be brought into being after a controlled crisis shakes things up, which is also what Elon Musk's grandfather was talking about as what he called it, a mass strike of the engineers that could consciously just get together and shut down society, shake it up, and then restart the machine or something. So there's no idea of the soul. Whereas when you look at the case of the better traditions of the West, the culture, it works when the culture is organized around appreciating that we have a divinity within us. We have natural law and you see this in China when you look at how China's promoting their movies, the shows that you see being popularized across China. A lot of the music, it's designed to bring about and reawaken a love of the classics, the lessons of Confucius, these higher, very Christian lessons of love thy neighbor, turn the other cheek, an eye for an eye, the world will go blind, the golden rule, do unto others as you would have them do unto you, which is a Confucian principle as well, enshrined in the Analects, centuries even before Jesus. So there's common insights about the nature of the creation, the creator, the created, that we find giving rise to the best. And when that's there, meritocracy works well. When it's not there, and you have cold hate, elitism, meritocracy, like anything, will be then used in a technocratically bad way to enslave and destroy. Everything is like that. If you don't have the culture, if the culture is not moral or in alignment with natural law, everything, the best ideas will be turned into weapons to destroy and enslave and kill us. So
it's what your goals are, right? So yeah. The goals of your meritocracy, in the case of China, it is to increase the standard of living, increase prosperity, increase real wealth. And you can see that their results are incredible with this mindset and direction that they've taken themselves in, rather than, I guess the goal of, a complete system of rule and surveillance and control over people.
Mm-hmm. So I've got a question here. Well, there's a little bit of a dispute. I don't know if I want to bring this in because we're sort of wrapping up our show today, but there's an important dispute happening in the chats that I'm noticing here between a few of our guests, our live audience, regarding the strange phenomenon of Promethean Pack, which lately has gone from being a very anti-war, pro-development, pro-cooperation movement into being a champion for the current war in Iran. I'll just read, actually, why not bring up a couple of these points, because it's important. I got Warren here, who's just written, Trump is being portrayed by Promethean Action as a genius playing 5D chess to take down the British Empire. As the baboon of War-a-Lago, a dead man walking in 2026. Any thoughts? The second thing that Warren has put out here is just in Promethean Action, and this is a big part of the narrative space that the narrative ecosystem of just seeing a lot of MAGA anti-war people turning into neocons. We're seeing a lot of that. So he's that Promethean Action's point is one representative of this. He says in Promethean Action's latest, they assert that rabidly irrationalist neo-Asherite mullahs with criminal minds are like unto Hitler and other genocidalist Malthusians as the Club of Rome. Would you like to speak to either one of those 2 points as far as the dead man walking into the 2026 elections and the self-destruction or the self-abuse that's been done by the current policies that the U.S. has been doing onto itself? Is it really taking down the British Empire, or is it doing something more self-destructive? And number 2, is there characterization of Iran as likened to Hitler and the Malthusians of the Club of Rome? Is that an appropriate assessment of Iran in your mind?
I can maybe speak to that.
Oh, I can't hear you. Your audio is not working.
My audio is not working?
No, can't hear you. Can people hear Cynthia right now? No, I hear nothing, Cynthia.
So
your audio is...
All right, Matt, maybe wrap it up. You answer it then.
Okay, yeah, I could hear Cynthia, as people might have guessed, is in the same house as me. Oh, Thomas says Cynthia's audio is fine. Okay, is my audio okay?
Yeah.
Okay, everyone can hear you. It's only me who cannot hear you for some reason. Okay. So you go ahead and you can address that.
Well, Matt, just you address it for a second. I'll be right back.
Hold on 1 second. Yep, everyone can hear you just fine. But I'm going to open up my door here so I can hear you better. So
can you just address it so I can take that? I'll be right back. I just have to go,
Okay. Okay, I can say a word to that. We could hear each other in the same house. You're going to come back, right?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So I'll say a word, and then Cynthia could jump in. I would say that there is an unfortunate downgrade. There's I think a downgrade of a lot of people's thinking, who all are desperate right now to try to hold on to the idea that the American system that we love so much has been revived, and it is requiring that we ignore a lot of reality. Number one is that Iran has been playing a key role in the most anti-Malthusian thing I have seen emerge onto the scene in the last 80 years, which is the Belt and Road Initiative, of which it plays a key strategic link within the East-West corridors, as well as the North-South transportation corridor unveiled by India, Russia, and Iran back in 2001. And the role it's playing in both of those things has been extremely important as far as generating a new type of alternative based upon increasing productivity and cooperation, instead of this Hobbesian idea of a crusader logic of spreading wars for the gain of the military-industrial complex around the world, which has been sort of the norm. So I think overall, that is more of what I'm seeing Iran play as a role. As far as the Hitler comments that has been asserted by Promethean Pack, I don't understand where that type of characterization is coming from. Iran does seem to be, according to people who live in Iran, and according to, I think, all agreed upon analysts who look at these things, there's a massive Christian community of 350,000 Christians. There's 300 Christian churches in every province. There's 20,000 Jews, including Jews who are members of the parliament. So there's actually political representation for the minority groups of Iran. You have women. We've been told that it's like Mordor, where women don't get an education, but in fact, we're seeing a very high array of women in university, in the STEM educations, especially one of the most robust nuclear science medical isotope sectors in the world. They have more cyclotrons than most countries that generate some of the most valuable isotopes for diagnostics and treatment of a variety of diseases. That's one of their pioneering things. That's also why they've made the point that they need to have what we have for civilian enriched nuclear reactors going back for quite some time. Canada has, the Chalk River reactor that produces medical isotopes, as well as experimental isotopes that you can only get by having enriched materials. It doesn't need, just because you're doing enrichment does not mean you have a secret nuclear weapons program. And the other thing I would say on that point too, for those who are saying, as I've noticed certain members, I don't know if this is a full consensus amongst the Promethean Pact, that Iran has been lying about their secret nuclear weapons program. In fact, Dick Cheney was correct. Benjamin Netanyahu has been correct. They have a secret nuclear weapons program, and the facts prove it. The facts don't prove it. Actually, all of that evidence comes from MI6, which Kit Klarenberg did a whole breakdown of the role of MI6 in generating, especially since 2007, and embedding it into the IAEA and infiltrating the IAEA, as well as U.S. And other intelligence agencies in the Middle East. The lie that Iran has a nuclear weapons program using documents that were found apparently at an old dilapidated warehouse. Netanyahu even used this information when he announced these 2 tons or a ton of documents that Mossad had procured 12 days before the sunset clause was to end for the JCPOA. And he announced to the world, he gave this P.T. Barnum presentation about how Mossad has procured all of these documents proving Iran has a nuclear weapons program. Not true, actually. None of those documents talked about that. They only talked about what happened between 1997 and 2003 before the fatwa against the development of any nuclear weapons was ever, was presented. So this has been repeated. There was never actually evidence that was true, but it was used to then back up what Trump was doing 12 days later when he canceled the JCPOA. Iran had actually been going along with every part of the deal that they had been honoring, enriching or providing their enriched uranium to other countries, France, Russia, and then having that purchased back or brought back for the civilian sector. All of that was the case. So we've been lied to. I think that Promethean Pact knows better. They've had access to some of the best intelligence from their EIR magazine for 45 years that documented all of these lies that they used to be against. They used to be for exposing that. And I've just noticed here one of the Promethean Pact members is even in the audience here saying the British put Khomeini in power. Indeed, they did. And yet reality, history moves forward. And there's evidence that the British didn't get what they wanted, because Khomeini also, for all of his crazy problems, and he was a major problematic figure who was installed to overthrow the Shah by the CIA and the British in that color revolution. Despite all of that, he still nationalized BP. The Mujahideen-e-Khalq that the British were directing didn't get the power position that they were expected to get when they were used as the battering ram for that color revolution, and they were expelled. And all of that's ignored, that they had to leave Iran, and then they went to Iraq, where they were given support by Donald Rumsfeld and brought into this massive paramilitary apparatus in Iraq that generated the Iraq-Iran war. That was the MEK, the Mujahideen-e-Khalq. That was a terrorist organization run by the West that Iran banned, that was supposed to be in power in Iran if the British had gotten their way. So, these are things to just keep in mind. And by the way, who took them off the terrorist list? It was the United States, because they became more useful at overthrowing Iran as part of a regime change operation that even George Soros has been backing, like the Green Revolution in 2009 and onward, which the MEK and other insurgency groups have been behind, supported by the British and the Americans. So again, a lot of information has to be ignored to maintain the idea that because the British played a role in overthrowing the Shah 46 years ago, that the British are controlling things today, ignoring everything else. Now, Cynthia, you've done a whole series of deep dives on Iran and their battle for sovereignty, going back from Mossadegh and the overthrow of Mossadegh through the battles for nuclear power in the 1960s and 70s, the overthrow of the Shah, and how Iran changed its paradigm towards something very, very positive in the 1990s that brought it into a collaborative policy with other Eurasian powers. Could you say anything about that?
Yes. I want to add quickly as well that the situation with Mossadegh and with Khomeini, American intelligence was always involved in that. Kermit Roosevelt as well played a role in the ouster of Mossadegh. And with the Shah, he was very much controlled by American influences with the whole Khomeini thing. Henry Kissinger played a very central role. I think EIR was the one who published, or it was at least Dreyfus had published that it was actually the New York Times had reported that someone who was within the meeting room with Jimmy Carter asked when they take hostages, then what do we do? So it was very predictable, like this whole situation. The Americans were very much involved in it, and they used this as a way, by the way, because there were trade deals that were going on with France, Germany, and Japan with the Middle East to actually trade in nuclear, to have and have oil in return. And they were also trading with South Korea and Brazil. During this time, the France and Germany were told that they should not be trading with even South Korea and Brazil. So part of what happened with the hostage takeover, which was a coordinated plan with British and American intelligence, Henry Kissinger playing a large role in all of this, was to actually cut off these deals that were happening. And it really hurt, actually, France, Germany, and Japan, as well as these Gulf countries. They had seized a lot of Iranian assets in the banks as well over this. In terms of things that started to go in a more positive direction, Rafsanjani, I think, started to move things in a better way, but especially Khatami. And Khatami was the one who brought forward the dialogue amongst civilizations. And he had met with Pope John and was talking about, having a very positive, development of relations where, like Syria, for instance, was the cradle of civilization. It's been put through the ringer in the last few years, but you had a whole bunch of different religions that had been coexisting there peacefully for a long time. There's no reason why, there has to be this kind of like Muslim against Christian world. And a lot of this has been organized to be the case through, Kissinger, Brzezinski, Bernard Lewis, and so forth, for endless war. So Khatami understood this. He understood how Iran was getting pushed into this. They were played. And so he was bringing forward this dialogue of civilizations concept. In an interview, he said some very great things, which I think maybe we have, it's maybe too long. I don't know if we want to, but in 2000, let's do it. Okay. In 2000, Khatami made a visit to China with a 170-member delegation. And in a lecture delivered at Beijing, Khatami said, even if one were to rely solely on historical documents, we can still demonstrate the existence of uninterrupted historical links between China and Iran as early as the 3rd century, which he's referring to the historic Silk Road of cultural exchange. We can observe a striking spectrum of cultural and spiritual interchanges involving religions, customs, thoughts, literature, and ethics, which on the whole added to the vitality and vivacity of Eastern culture and thought, and that the Chinese outlook has been instrumental in opening up the way to the fruitful and constructive historical discourses throughout the ages due to its emphasis on the intellectual over the political, in an attempt to epitomize wisdom, temperance, and parsimony. Emphasis on our long-standing close historical ties and dialogue among the great Asian civilizations is a valuable instrument for the regenerating of thought, culture, language, and learning. In Asian civilizations, culture has always been the core of the economic and political process. Therefore, we are compelled to give a more serious thought to the revival of our cultures. So I think maybe we can end here by talking about how a lot of people in the global South that are supportive of the Russia-China alliance, Iran alliance, they recognize that all three of these countries are very old civilizations, but especially China and Iran. Iran, has a long history, centuries old history that I think, if you look at all three countries went through a political operation, the Bolshevik Revolution. You can say there are elements of the Communist Revolution in China there was British intelligence behind it, and Iran with the Khomeini. And so now everybody looks to China as like, oh, your memory or your identity starts under Mao, and with Iran, your identity starts with Khomeini, disregarding that these countries have a very long civilizational history that they still look to, that they still recognize, they study. It is part of their cultural identity. And I think that it's a real, cheap shot to try to reduce these countries to a much lower level than they actually are.
Yeah, I think that's an important concept, that these civilizational forces are thousands of years old and have an influence that transcends the particular expressions of what political power is. We all know the Mongols were terrible. They were used as martial lords for Venice to destroy, kind of like ISIS operatives, other competing nations and civilizations that were seen as a threat to Venice's hegemony. But despite that, once they came into China and took control of China, they ended up getting absorbed into a much more powerful Confucian Buddhist type of cultural matrix that allowed that deeper civilizational force to continue beyond their particular moment that they were in a dominant position. So culture and the battle of this higher ideal of culture that Schiller had written so well about and understood so well, and that the Promethean Action Pact people used to understand so well, is, I think, something that is extremely important and undervalued as far as appreciating what is the nature of the battle. What is it that used to give rise to the best of the West that made us good, such that we've abrogated those responsibilities? And when you listen to John F. Kennedy, you look at how the protective tariff was applied in the best of ways to do so many good things based upon a vision for the future under FDR, under JFK, under Lincoln, under McKinley. It is totally in opposition to the revenue tariff that we've been talking about today, which is much more akin to what the British Empire was doing as far as telling nations, using a tariff for themselves to protect their own industry in a certain way, but they were doing it at the expense of other nations, of India, of the colonies of the Americas. This is the thing that Winthrop had even stood up against, to say, look, no, Massachusetts has a right to have an ironworks. We have a right to have manufacturing in the colonies, and the British were the ones doing what the US has found itself doing against Japan, against South Korea, against other nations, saying, no, you're not going to be allowed to have your own industries, your own rice, non-GMO rice in Japan. That's going to be from Monsanto rice made in America to be brought in. You're not going to have your own higher standard cars and automobiles that you're going to make with your own manufacturing sector. You're going to open up for US made cars right now that are going to destroy the actual existent industrial car manufacturing sector that you currently have. That's going to come undone if you don't want to suffer pain, if you don't want to have tariffs. You're going to do these things. You're going to put your money, $500 billion or more, into a pot that we're going to administer as BlackRock billionaires to reinvest in America, or else. Same thing to South Korea, same thing to other nations. So that is more akin to what the British Empire was doing for its idea of a tariff policy than anything that Lincoln or McKinley was doing. And again, I think that the Promethean Action people know this deep down inside, and they're still pushing a narrative that it makes me wonder why they're doing that. So thank you, Cynthia, for taking the time today to share your insights about the world strategic situation. It was an extremely important discussion. And again, I invite people to subscribe to Cynthia's very important series that is ongoing right now about this, called The Real Agenda Behind Venezuela, Iran, Greenland. And the last question actually I just saw pop in a little bit earlier today is, hi, Cynthia, when are we expecting your new book? I have read The Empire in Which the Black Sun Never Set.
It's a very challenging book for volume 2. So I probably will be getting out The Shaping of a New World Religion volume 2 first, but both book series are going to be, overlapping in terms of content. So I hope to maybe get that out by November if I don't get too distracted by all of the geopolitical writing that I've been doing lately.
Indeed. All right. And yeah, there's one particular Promethean Action Pact, a member, writing a lot of stuff in the chat. So maybe send me some of those questions, and we'll address them, regarding why China is evil, and why Xi Jinping's son lives in London, and how China bailed out Wall Street in London after the 2008 crash, which makes them evil. We could address that. Maybe we can even have a discussion on my platform as maybe a debate, a discussion.
Well, why dumping the U.S. Treasury bonds now?
Pardon me?
China is dumping the U.S. Treasury bonds right now. So
well, that's because the U.S. is now run by the patriots, and China only wants the U.S. if they're run by evil, and then they're okay. But since the U.S. has been redeemed and is run by the new Lincolns of the 21st century, then now they're bad and they have to be destroyed by China.
Promethean Pact should put out a response of the security report that came out this November 2025, where you're basically saying that America it's their hemisphere. It's not the Western hemisphere anymore. And you have now the right to go into any country in Latin America, and those resources are yours. I mean, honestly, this is a very transparent imperialistic policy at this point. He has repeatedly referred to Teddy Roosevelt, who I think you guys, at least at Promethean Pact, are at least still holding to the fact that Teddy Roosevelt was an Anglophile traitor to his own country. So why is Trump role modeling his policy towards Latin America on an Anglophile traitor who modeled it off of Cecil Rhodes' Rhodesia Africa plan? The Rhodes scholars that have infiltrated the U.S. administration. There are a lot of inconsistencies with this narrative that is honestly very disappointing and at this point immoral.
Yeah, and I'll just say for the person Gerald who is writing fanatically obsessed with proving that China is evil, Hitler as well as Iran, and because they said nice things about Kissinger. Let's have a debate. Let's talk this out. Send me an email and we'll organize that on one of my platforms outside of the Pluralia Dialogos, and we'll hash it out and see what the facts actually showcase. All right, so for everybody watching, thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. Thank you, Cynthia, for sharing your insights. Until the next one, bye-bye.